welcome to the Fall Alumni Panel for WRGW. My name is Owen Vacheron. If I didn't get to introduce myself to folks who just got here, I'm the current Alumni Director, and I was General Manager last year for the station as well. And then helping me host on this call is Jillian. Jillian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jillian. I'm in charge of marketing and analytics for the podcast team that we started last year at WRGW, and before that, I handled the operations.
Yes, indeed. And today on our panel, we have Jordan Grobe, Myles Goldman, Sarah Kranau, Gary Carlton, and Mark Cates. Unfortunately, Tori Sanders was slated to be on this call as well. She graduated in 2017. However, she had to duck out last minute. So Jordan was kind enough to fill in for her. So thank you, Jordan. Jordan's our on-call WRGW staffer, so we really appreciate his presence all the time. But if for our panelists, if we just want to go around and maybe we can start with Mark, if we want to introduce ourselves, maybe just talk about when you graduated from GW, some basic things just to get to know you.
Sure. Thanks, Owen. Hi, everybody. I was class of '82. Proudly an American Studies major, and also proudly wearing the 90th sweatshirt. I was really, really happy to come back for that 24-hour broadcast last year and earlier this year, actually. God, it's been a long time ago. And the station means so much to me. What means most to me is that it literally was the springboard to a career that I continued to do in the music business. I started working in an independent label here in Boston, which is where I grew up, and the Boston music scene really motivated me alongside everything else, I guess, to attempt to do this for a living. I will say that I arrived at GW having done a congressional internship, thinking that I would go into politics, and in less than 2 years as a poli-sci major, I decided I could not spend the rest of my life with those people. No offense to anyone in that category. I'm personally really glad that I had that epiphany. And the other epiphany I had, honestly, was as music director, hearing Jonathan talk about the limits of carrier current. I feel like we weren't even as far along as you talk about. I never felt like anybody was ever listening, and I didn't really care. It was an opportunity to express myself musically. And it was the moment when a promotion person wanted us to play the Lindsey Buckingham album that I really learned how things work, reported it, and we suddenly had service from the wheel labels, which I had been seeking for a long time. If you think about 1981 in particular, my favorite year in music, those labels had a majority of the best stuff that was coming out. Certainly not all of it, but a huge portion of it, especially Sire Records alone. Anyway, I spent 16 and a half years in Los Angeles, mostly working at Geffen. Decided after that, ran Grand Row Records for the Beastie Boys for 3 years. And as that was on its way out, I made a lifestyle decision to move back to my hometown and try and operate from here. Started initially putting out records extremely unsuccessfully, segued into management, which is what I've been doing ever since. My main client is MGMT, who hopefully some of you are familiar with. I also work with artists like Mission of Burma, my original inspiration to get into music. The Cribs, Doves, who have an astonishing new album out, forgive the self-promotion, Swim Mountain, and a new artist called Kunzite. That's as succinct as I can be, I hope.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Mark. Why don't we jump to Sarah for our next intro?
Hi. I'm Sarah Kranau. I graduated in 2014. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Myles. Oh, I haven't seen you guys in so long. So I graduated in 2014. I was a sociology and communication major. And during my time at WRGW, I was marketing director. And I also hosted a number of talk shows and music shows. And then now today, I work in HR by day. Thrilling stuff, I know. And then in my free time, I host a podcast with my best friend. So yeah.
Amazing. What's the name of your podcast, if I could ask?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I should plug it. It's called Not So Casual Encounters, and it is about sex, dating, and internet culture.
Amazing. That's super interesting. I'm sure we'll get into that more later, so don't want not too many spoilers right now.
Cool.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks. And then why don't we jump to Gary?
Okay, I was at WRGW from 1972 through 1976. 72 and 73 were difficult years for the station, but then we started a upward trend going through 76. The way that we tried to boost interest in the station is, in those days, sorry everyone, we could drink alcohol at 18. And so we had the Rathskeller in the Marvin Center, which served beer and wine. And we were able to get them to do a disco night, which most of you would never play. But the fact of the matter is, it drew in big crowds of people. And we got a simulcast of that going, and it increased the interest in the station. And in the same way that Jonathan had mentioned about making sure that the station was always on in the Marvin Center, we had people monitoring whether or not they changed the station, and we would call to whoever was managing the buildings to make sure that the station was tuned back into WRGW, because that was basically our only audience other than, in the dorms themselves. I served as an assistant station manager and a program director. I had been voted in as station manager in the spring of my last year, but I decided to go to law school, and I was a poli-sci communications major. I ended up practicing law privately for 39 years, and I became a judge in April of 2019, and I continue acting as a judge now. But since I never lost the love of radio for the past 10 years, I have done college radio in New York at a SUNY Westbury school, OWWR, and I post up my shows at choicecuts.info. And if you look back to a February 8th, 2014 show of mine, that was a WRGW tribute in which we had various people who were associated with WRGW come on the air and talk about those days. So if you want to hear something about the past, that's on there. I also noticed that one of my classmates, Bonnie Miller, is on the call. So just want to shout out to Bonnie.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Gary. Yeah, everyone definitely tune into Choice Cuts. I've listened to a few episodes. It is a wonderful show. Very fine program.
Thank you.
And all right, awesome. Why don't we jump to now? How about Myles? Give us a quick intro.
Hi everyone. I'm Myles Goldman. I was class of 2015 at GW. Majored in political communication, and I minored in public health. And while I was at GW, by the way, it's great to have Mark on the panel with me. So it's always great to have another Boston person, since I'm from the Boston area myself. And also hi to Jordan and Sarah. It's good to see both of you as well, since we served on the same boards together. And so I started at the station as a freshman, and was in news. I spent my 3 years at the station I spent in the news department. First as just a broadcaster on the 6 o'clock news, and then became late in my freshman year an assistant news director, and then ultimately my junior year I became news director. And so I was focused on sort of trying to make WRGW news, be really good at covering campus and also local DC news. And then today I ended up deciding I wanted to wasn't as interested ultimately in going the journalism route. I have too many opinions and enjoy trying to persuade people a little bit too much to be actually in journalism. So I ended up going the more public relations, public affairs route. And so since GW, I've been at a couple PR agencies, and then I'm now the communications manager at a healthcare association that represents hospitals and nonprofit hospitals and health systems, where this year in the middle of the pandemic, I helped us launch a podcast of our own.
Very exciting. What a time. What a time to launch a podcast. We love to see that. And last and certainly not least, Jordan, if you want to give us a quick intro.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jordan Grobe. I was the general manager of WRGW 2015 and 2016, graduated 2016. My background is pretty much more music related, but while I was at the station, I did kind of everything from operations to talk and news and music. I helped with one sports broadcast, so I can claim the hat trick. It's great to see Myles and Sarah again. It's been a while. We all overlapped at different intervals in our time there.
I remember when Jordan joined the station.
Yep.
Aww.
As do I. Yeah.
Our little Jordan.
And
he went on to do great things.
Thank you. As Gary was saying, it was important for us to get out of the station just as much as it was to be in the station, because that was where people really heard and saw us. So we did a lot of events on campus and around campus, and Myles did a great job covering news stories across campus and across DC. We had a ton of concerts go on, which, obviously we can't do now, but that projected me into my currently paused career. I work for IMP, where we own the 930 Club, Lincoln Theater, the Anthem, and Meriwether Post Pavilion. I've worked there for about 6 years now. We're currently in stasis, complete hibernation due to COVID. And so as a result of that, I'm now the communications coordinator for NIVA, which is the National Independent Venue Association. We have about 3,000 members across the country that have all banded together to now advocate Congress to pass legislation to specifically bail out our industry, because we are completely frozen and stuck, and all the rental overheads, all that stuff is still in place. So we're close. We just got into the new stimulus package, which passed the House yesterday. So we're getting there. We're making progress.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jordan. Jillian, would you like to ask a few questions to get us officially started here?
Yeah. So I guess our next question would be, what skills would you say you've gained from your time at WRGW, and how have those skills aided you professionally, or anything that, so whoever wants to start can take over.
I'll take it. Some of the skills that I developed there predated my time at the station, but when I was there, I was able to think about things in a bigger picture, particularly once I had that epiphany about record service. I had actually started answering the request line at WBCN, the progressive rock station of that era here in Boston, when I was 16, because they were looking for people, and there wasn't a lot of accountability back then, you could say. And it was amazing. It was just amazing. To me, it was not because I wanted to go into the music business. It was because hanging out at the station was more interesting than just listening to it. And interesting it really was. And I started making friends, and I pretty much, it was not quite an office space scenario, but I kind of hung around. At one point, I did a so-called internship to allow me to graduate from GW on time, as a matter of fact. But it was really about hanging out with people, getting to know them. I think for me in particular, not being intimidated by artists. And I would say that the most direct relationship to that would be the interviews that I did at the station, even though some of them were done simply to get into shows for free. Dare I say, maybe most of them. The interesting thing about my time there, and in some ways, I doubt this has changed very much. There weren't a lot of media outlets covering the artists that were playing, for example, at the 930, and this is the original 930 on F Street. there weren't a lot of media outlets in the entire country probably covering some of those artists. So they were very happy to take care of me. And when possible, I tried to do what I could, knowing that, I mean, we had Black Flag in the station. The show was probably sold out already because it was the first Black Flag show at the 9:30 with Henry Rollins as a vocalist. But I'm not sure there were kids in the Marvin Center that heard that interview and decided they had to go to the show. I hope there were. But, it was, yeah, I mean, I think that we all can share the reality that we were doing something for the station. Again, the station seems to be so much of a force now, and the web aspect of it completely changes the game. But from that highly restricted carrier current or less platform, a lot of us were able to do a lot of things. And Michael Simon's not on with us today, but he's a major television producer who's done all kinds of stuff, particularly in the music realm, particularly at MTV and VH1. And some of it's just intangible, but honestly, for me, it's like not being intimidated by talking to people. I got involved in a political campaign and found myself at a table at the Four Seasons in Georgetown with the members of Cheap Trick, and didn't even really know what I was supposed to do, but that's how you learn.
Yeah,
I'll give two experiences that I think helped me. Back probably around 74, 75, Asylum Records, which in those days had the Doors, they had Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in their solo careers, they had the Eagles. They decided that college radio stations really weren't important enough to the advancement of their artists. And so they decided to stop giving the free records that we were getting from all the record companies. And so the various college stations in the Washington area and in a number of other areas banded together and said, well, if you don't want to give us your records, we're not going to play your artists. And we were actually successful in, fighting the ban, and they eventually reinstated us to the point that they started really soliciting our interest. I got to see Billy Joel at the Cellar Door, which I don't know if it exists any longer, but a small club in Georgetown when he was on his way up. And I later used that to get an interview with his saxophone player, Richie Kanata. And we both shared our experiences about that night in the Cellar Door. But overall, it just gave me the confidence to speak and speak publicly. And I spent my 39 years as a trial attorney, and certainly the confidence I got being on the air, I used to, in my legal career.
amazing. Anyone else want to jump in?
I'll just add that I think I agree with what Mark and Gary were saying, and that's so cool, Gary. By the way, about the Billy Joel story. I think it's one of the skills. One of them that I found was leadership, and just the opportunity to sort of grow as a leader and to experience what leadership looks like in a relatively semi-professional to professional and environment. Certainly, it's WRGW is not a corporation, but it's a responsibility certainly to be out on the air and have people hear you, or the website. And so I think that's definitely something that helped me just grow in terms of that.
Awesome.
I'll jump in as well. I think one of the biggest things that I learned from WRGW was just figuring out how to get things done, and just like learning how to do things, and like learning by doing, I think, because a lot of stuff at the station was kind of like well, the person who knew how to do this graduated last year, and we don't really know how to do this. We're going to figure out. So yeah, so just a lot of like jumping into figuring things out, be it like how to organize an event or like how to literally do something with the soundboard because something was going wrong, or how to operate really janky software that like was not good, and then teach other people how to do it. So really just like learning how to like think on your feet and dive in and figure things out. I think that's been like one of the biggest things that's translated to like my career, even though I don't work in music or like any sort of industry related to this. I think just the ability to dive in and like started a new company and you're figuring out how things work, or you're trying to figure out some sort of software, and just learning by doing and being comfortable with that, or like at least as comfortable as you can be, I think has been hugely helpful in my life. And I think that's definitely something I got from the radio station directly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of those things. The only thing that I guess I'll add is I think it was also really useful for like helping to find a voice. Like, I don't know about everyone else, but I was pretty shy when I got to college. And I think having a platform that you can speak through, but you're not directly relating to a person like in a room, helps you sort of find what you want to talk about because you're not surrounded by any kind of like actual judgment. And I think through that experience, you become a lot more comfortable talking about everything and anything. And then you can take that and start to apply it outside that boardroom, the control room. And I think that was really helpful.
Yep. I think also just like doing things because you like doing them, I think is another thing I learned from the radio station. So even if, you know, you don't think that there's going to be an audience for your show or whatever, like you could still go do your show on the radio station. Like if you had this obscure interest or whatever, like you could go do it. And just because you liked doing the show, and it didn't matter if you had like 2 listeners. And I think that's another thing that I've learned in life, that as I get older, like I'm just going to do stuff because I like doing it. Like, I don't care if it like gets me more followers on Instagram, or like if only 10 people listen to whatever I'm doing, you know, like it's like the part of like doing it because it's fun for you and you like doing it. And just doing things for that, for you, I think has also like been something that I still am learning, but I think that started with radio.
I think it also gives you a good taste of like doing something that you love, but it's also work. And figuring out like what that balance is, and if you want to pursue something that you love as work, or if you'd rather keep them separate.
But even the idea of putting a show together, 2 hours or 3 hours, there's a lot of effort, even if there may not necessarily be enough listeners to justify the amount of work you're doing. But when you think about putting together the sets and how you want it to sound and what you want to say about the music that you're playing, it's definitely time consuming. You probably put in 2 to 3 times as much time as you're on the air, just putting the shows together. And as Sarah said, you're doing it out of love for radio or music.
Awesome. If no one else has anything to add, I think we can move on to our next subject. And I think you guys have all given us a pretty good idea of, you know, how you got to where you currently are and what your careers have been and whatnot. I think one thing Jillian and I were both really curious about, and I'm sure other folks are wondering, is if you've ever had any detours in your career, or points in time where you think you might have been second guessing what you're doing, or, you know, even at that time, you know, we got a lot of seniors on this call, myself included, where you're getting ready to graduate and maybe you don't know if what you really want to do is something that like is the safest route. I guess if you want to talk a little bit about that, and yeah, that'd be great.
I think you just got to do it. I think if it's something that you're committed to and interested in, you can't necessarily wait for an opportunity. So like if you want to go into music, you know, now is a difficult time when everything is kind of paused, but you can actively be out there either making your own music or finding artists that you love and figuring out ways to help propel their careers. There will always be a need for someone who can talk about music. There will always be a need for someone that can help produce music, whether that's in a studio or in a concert environment. And there is no substitute for just like actually doing something. So like if you want experience on the radio, keep being on the station, and then when you graduate, make a podcast. Just like creating your own angles on things, I think, is more important than waiting for them to come to you.
I agree with Jordan on that. I think it's a deal where you do have to jump in, and there's, with the podcast aspect, there's a lot of opportunities opening up in the podcasting realm. I think, and it's in a variety of spaces, whether it's various organization types, whether it be businesses or nonprofits and associations are really jumping on board. There was just a report that came out, I think, within the last week or so, that was showing that podcast listening has grown. I forget what the amount was by, but during the pandemic alone, people who used to just listen to podcasts, maybe while they were driving home from work, are now listening at any time of the day because they're working from home. And so there's going to be organizations and businesses who are going to want people who understand how the audio medium works. So I think WRGW is a great experience for that path if you want to take it.
I think under normal circumstances, career anxiety, self-doubt, all that stuff is completely normal. Under these circumstances, I don't even know what to tell you guys, other than, I guess, as a parent who had a conversation with my recently graduated son just before this, I'm living a version of it. I think what everyone else has said is great. And the podcasting, as established as you might feel like it is from a business standpoint, these are still very early days, and even more so outside the United States. And it doesn't mean that English-speaking podcasts can't go anywhere, because there's no way Spotify would have done the investment that they've done recently, particularly with Joe Rogan, if they thought it was going to live only within the United States. Then we'll see what happens there. But it's an exciting realm. I'm working on one myself. It's a little premature to talk about, but I watched a Zoom last night that the Guild of Music Supervisors put together, and I could tell you that music licensing and podcasting is at a prenatal state already, in part mostly because music publishers have not really come around to dealing with it for what it is. But it was fascinating to hear people talk about not even being asked what listenership was or advertising revenue or anything like that, and yet getting licensed music that in any other realm, those metrics would be a requirement for the request. So it's great that the station is giving people a training ground, and look at the podcasters that are graduates that we already have on here.
Yeah, that's the only thing that's been keeping me from doing a podcast, is it's hard to talk about music without being legally able to play any of it. So for those of you who are in the music department at WRGW, definitely take advantage of the fact that you're currently covered by WRGW's licensing, and do as much of that podcasting as you'd like right now, because it will get harder to do later.
Anyone else have anything to add in terms of just, career changes, detours, concerns in that early professional development stage?
Hey, Owen, this is Jonathan. I certainly want to make sure that panelists get a chance to answer, but I definitely have a comment on that.
Yeah, feel free to chime in.
Okay, great. So it's been a while since I graduated from GW. And I think the thing is we put a lot of weight on that very first step. And I think looking back at it, it's not so critical, meaning that, let's face it, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. Many people are going to clearly understand that if you have to make a choice to exist, you'll get that opportunity. So, I mean, definitely, I think gravitate as closely as you can towards your interests and your skills. But then it's okay to do something different. In fact, I'll tell you, WRGW definitely influenced my first step, and really my thorough career. My first step, in the sense that my first job coming out of school was selling computers initially for 3 years before going to graduate school. And it was the experience of working with WRGW and the sales aspect that spawned it. If I hadn't worked at WRGW, who knows if that would have happened. And then from there, my career, I think the thing that it probably has had the most impact on, and even recently, because unfortunately, I was impacted by a layoff over the summer, but moving forward with my next step. But, you know, when you do career stuff, you come back to visiting all the things that you've worked on over the years. And a lot of things continue to point back to WRGW. And the main thing is the collaboration. It was really my first opportunity to be able to collaborate across a group. When I was working as the business manager in particular, during my junior and senior year, I had the opportunity to work with the program manager, the general manager, things we talked about earlier before the recording, to just basically ensure that, you know, when ads came in, they got played. We ensured that things got delivered within the dining hall. I mean, that wasn't something one person can do alone. And there's a lot of things you can't do alone. And earlier, what Gary was talking about with creating a big program. So collaboration is something that is definitely highly valued in the market today. And to show that not only can you work individually, but you can actually work with people who have different viewpoints, different sets of skills, and yet do something great is important. So anyway, those were my comments.
I would just add as a final note, I did not end up in, like I said, an industry that's related to radio. However, I'm in an industry that I really like now, but that took me many years to figure out. So I would say don't stress, like he was saying kind of about that first step, like you put so much emphasis on it. And then in the grand scheme of things, like it's not as big a deal as people think. So I would just say don't stress if you don't know what you're going to do after you graduate. I didn't know what I wanted to do after I graduated. Took me, like I said, many more years to figure that out and several industries later. But it'll be fine. Like you'll work, some jobs you'll like, some jobs you won't, but you'll figure it out. You'll gravitate towards what works for you. So just, I guess, keep the faith.
Awesome. Gary, I don't want to cut you up, but did you have anything else to add?
I would only say that there are a lot more opportunities in production, not necessarily radio production, but the amount of material that's needed for the various cable TV stations seemed to me to be an avenue that people should explore. I know that right now they're not necessarily out there and doing the work, but there's a tremendous amount of product that's needed, either writing or producing or acting. So I would just think that that's something that I didn't have as an available outlet in the days where it was basically, the three networks and PBS.
I think this is also a really good time to invest in yourself and in any potential skills that you would want to have for whenever COVID is over, because the virus will eventually go away, and I think there are going to be a lot of positions in interesting fields that used to be filled but are no longer filled, and because people will have had to pivot away in order to protect themselves, because it's been probably about a year in the case of the music industry that we're looking at being closed. So taking the time that you have now to learn new skills, refine your skills, figure out different avenues that you may want to try that you haven't before, I think this is a good opportunity to do that.
And I wouldn't judge the marketplace based on now, because there's massive change underway, and it's really the early part of it. So it's another reason to be patient. And it's really good advice what you said, Sarah, about and I think Jonathan said too, about whatever you do first is probably not what you're going to be doing forever. Try not to put too much pressure on yourself, but try to always be doing something going in that direction.
Yeah, I just want to add on to Mark's point. The world, when I graduated from GW, it's just amazing how much has changed and how much we didn't anticipate it would change, and even the rate of the change. And so I just have to imagine that people are coming out of school now the rate of change is going to be even more dramatic, and the amount of options may even be very, different. Lots of different options and lots of different options. So, yes, I think that the good news is because of that, whatever that first step is, isn't necessarily mean that you've now locked yourself into something for 20, 30, 40 years. So, but yeah, obviously it's interesting times now, but I'm just saying, but if we look at how technology continues to change, I think this will favor people that are coming out of school now.
Yeah, certainly.
I think like going off of all these points tie into our next question for each of you. How do you think your professions have changed with this pandemic of having to learn how to adapt to Zooms and certain industries just shutting down, and how have you handled that?
Well, mine doesn't exist. So concerts don't exist in any form. So I was furloughed in June. But that allowed the full pivot into now protecting this ecosystem that I am so wholly ingrained in and in love with. These independent venues can't be replaced, and if they go away, they're small businesses just like all the others. They're going to be replaced not by other small businesses. So as far as the industry is concerned, it's been this like full pivot away from doing the thing that we're used to doing every single night around the people that we're used to doing it with every single night, to now being on screens and talking about how we can pull each other up and pull each other over the finish line for whenever this is over. But the problem with it is that it's a $10 billion problem, so it's not something that individuals can solve. It's something that really only Congress can. But we're all independent business owners that have banded together, and they've never given up before, so they're not giving up now, which is why we've gotten 2 million letters to Congress and have actually gotten the ear of all of these Congress people, to the extent that, we're now in a relief package. So I think that the lesson there for people more broadly is just be prepared to pivot and to protect your interests. You never know what angle your job and career is going to take, but just be flexible for any way that you can help in those circumstances, whether that's applying your skills in a way that you haven't applied them before. I've never done political PR, now I am. Or if you're just learning new skills on the fly because no one's ever done this before in your group, and you're just trying to help in whatever way that you can.
Wonderful.
Speaking more to music, I guess, I have a little bit more opportunity to operate than Jordan does, but the live side does drive the music business. In fact, it's gotten so slanted that way that it's ultimately going to change. And what's most interesting for me is the stuff that's going on that isn't really going to be visible for a while. I can just tell you that I'm working on multiple things that would not have happened without the pandemic, that will be new businesses or initiatives when and if they come to market. And I should also say that I've been filling my time with all kinds of things. I've been lucky because my clients have been pretty busy. So the general work that I do has still taken up most of my time. But tangentially from this, I was connected by the Dean of Columbian College to mentor a student group in the Summer Startup Accelerator, member of which JC Case is actually watching here, which is great because it's actually a music app that they're designing. And I had this amazing 9-week crash MBA almost. Definitely not my background. GW was the extent of my formal academic training, shall we say. So, for me, it's just been like a ton of learning and a lot of Zooms and a lot of reconnecting with people. And I'm talking to so many people that are embarking on new ventures. And yeah, I mean, I will say most of the music business is not going to look the same Jordan is lucky being involved with IMP, like probably one of the most fiercely independent music businesses of any kind in the world, and aggressively so at a time where, you know, companies like that have been bought up multiple times in the last 15 years. That is the norm. And, you know, all of a sudden Live Nation has to take $700 million of investment from Saudi Arabia, because they're a publicly traded company and Saudi Arabia can buy that much stock any day that they want to. So not being beholden to that kind of situation, it's a little bit of an unfair word to use there, I guess. But the point is, you know, the economics are changing. We all spend a lot of time talking about what it's going to be like, quote unquote, when things come back. Well, I don't know if they're ever going to come back to where they were. And some of that probably needed to happen one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, be prepared for things to look different, but also start thinking differently. Like if you have ideas that maybe wouldn't have worked before, they might now. No one knows. Worth a shot.
Yeah, and this is Jonathan. Just want to come back to WRGW, and during the time that I was there, you know, we were emancipated from from the communications department at that time. But what was important is we had to figure out a way to survive on our own funds, and we had to do it on a carrier current platform, AM carrier current platform. So we just had to think creatively, how are we going to do that? How are we going to raise money from that? And we figured out ways to sell the advertising through the other outlets like we talked about earlier, but probably just as important was supplementing things. So really it was a matter of figuring out how to do things differently. And if we have that roadblock, how do we in fact, you know, supplement it, go around it? How can we in fact figure out a way to do that? And I think with this environment, we're often, I mean, I think a lot of us are faced with this, figuring out how to take our skills, our value, and be able to, you know, perhaps use it a different way, but also just figure out a way so that we can continue to move forward with a mission. And I'm really glad with the people that were there at that time that we worked together and figured some things out that allowed us to be a sustainable radio station for a few years before it eventually became back to being part of the university and also merging with another radio station.
I'll add on my end in terms of the pandemic and the changes. We, as I think I mentioned when I was introducing myself, we ended up my association launching our podcast during this, and we had been talking about launching a podcast prior to the pandemic. We started planning late last year, but we were planning on launching in, I think it was July. And when the pandemic happened, we realized our members needed news from us now. They needed to hear from us more frequently. Hospitals, obviously, and we deal with a particular issue related to hospitals, but hospitals certainly on the front lines, a lot happening. And so they needed to hear from us more frequently, just in general. And we thought the podcast was one way to help fill that void. And so I ended up launching the podcast from home, and I'm not the only one who speaks on it. But one of my colleagues from the communications team does as well. But I've been conducting interviews from my apartment. And so it's been certainly a situation of just, you know, buying, you know, in some cases, and we are working with a company to help us produce it, just from the simple standpoint of putting the podcast together is not the only part of my job. But it's a situation where suddenly I'm buying, audio equipment again. And it does sort of, in some ways, as I think I said to Owen when I was speaking with him last week, it does it sort of is bringing me back towards my radio roots, so to speak. And, the other thing to think about too, beyond the podcast, is this is a time, obviously, that digital is even further exploding, that more and more people, maybe even people who weren't as involved in being involved in digital conversations are. So another aspect of my job is being the social media manager. And so social media is only growing, and certainly if you're someone who's interested in sort of more politics and advocacy, and I know many GW students are, certainly not everyone, but digital grassroots advocacy and marrying social media to advocacy is, that's only growing as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how all this is changing with the virus and whatnot. Gary, I had a specific question for you. I'm curious about how your show at OWWR is working, and also if anything has changed in terms of going into the courts or whatnot in your law career.
Let me just add, my oldest daughter, Lindsay, who was a GW student from 2001 to 2005. She spent her first week in lockdown at Thurston after 9/11. She's an event planner, and she works for the Tao Group in New York City. And obviously, she's been unable to really do her work. She's still working, but as they loosen restrictions to maybe 25%, she has the same situation that Jordan has described, where it's just very difficult to do her job in those times. As for myself, the positive from the standpoint of the legal community was that when I was a practicing lawyer, I could travel a half an hour to get to a court and then sit around in the courtroom for 2 hours waiting to see the judge for 10 minutes. And now that we're doing things virtually, it's a much more efficient way for lawyers to practice. Now, a lot of practices are not going forward because of, no evictions are permitted. So the landlord-tenant courts are virtually at a standstill. But when I do criminal arraignments, there are so many people involved in the process between the district attorney and the police bringing a defendant forward, and it's all being done in a manner that last year nobody would have conceived. So that's the little bit of the positive, that we've now utilized the technology that is advantageous to a lot of people, and then keeps the people out of the courtroom itself, which is still a real problem. We have to limit the number of people coming into the courts. I wear a mask when I'm on the bench. We have face shields and all kinds of plexiglass all over the place as a way to try to protect each other.
That's really interesting. And then with your radio program, have you been going to a studio to do that, or has that been from home?
Our station manager, Joe Manfredi, he in the end of June, beginning of July, went through the administration to have a pathway to be able to get back onto the air. And it's very strict. I wear a mask even when I'm on the air. I wear gloves. No guests in the studio. Whatever guests I have to do through telephone. And we have to wipe things down when we get there. We have to wipe things down when we leave. But it's enabled us to get back on the air by mid-July, and so many college stations are not operating that we think we're fortunate that we're able to at least broadcast.
That's good. That's good to hear that you guys have been able to keep going. If anyone else has anything else to add, or if no one else has anything else to add, we're gonna move on to the next subject. We got like one or two more questions, and then we're gonna open the floor to students on the call if they have any questions for our alumni. But one thing I think we're also curious about was how folks throughout your careers, and this could be ranging from either your time at WRGW to more professional aspects, how you've dealt with rejection along the way. I think that's something that's probably really good for students to hear, and I think to see how folks deal with that throughout their life is really interesting. So if anyone wants to comment on that, we'd love to hear.
I'll give a very quick story. When I graduated law school, every intent of mine was to get back into communications, either TV or back to radio. So I interviewed at WABC, at ABC, the network, and was one of 5 people in line to get a job, which I thought I could eventually transition into programming or some other aspect at the ABC network. And I was rejected. And I had to wait another 2 months, at which point I ended up taking a personal injury lawyer job, which is not what I wanted to do. But that's why I'm happy to have been able to come back to do at least college radio and, keep that as a part of my life.
That's great.
I think it relates to the point earlier about like your first thing isn't going to be your ultimate thing. And I think you have to simultaneously keep the biggest picture goal in mind, be open to pivoting, as Jordan suggested. And like I said, like you can't really dwell on it. Like it's every rejection, there's probably something to learn from, but it may well not have anything to do with you. And I also, it's a little hard for me to relate from going from a landline only postgraduate experience to now where I think it's almost the opposite, and you could drive yourself crazy because theoretically you'll never find every job opportunity that's posted online. And as one of my interns recently pointed out, they're convinced that a lot of those online posts only go up once the position's been filled. So, it's simplistic to say that you have it easier, and clearly not entirely accurate. I think you just have to stay up personally and, like I said, keep the big picture in mind and be prepared to change the big picture at any time and adjust it. And this is the most interesting time in modern history for that. It just is, because circumstances are forcing this every single day. And I guess I'm lucky as like a small entrepreneur, and who took a long time to get to become an entrepreneur. I guess I'm pretty open to it and rethinking everything. Also, when your job depends on human beings, that can honestly fire you at any time. As I like to say, my main client could be firing me on an email right now while I'm talking to you, but hopefully they aren't. You have to be, you mentally have to be prepared for worst case scenarios, ultimately. I mean, not truly. I don't think it's good to walk around being a fatalist, but I do think it's good to be aware of what could happen on both positive and negative sides.
Certainly.
And to add to that, I think, to add what Mark was saying, you never know what is going to happen, which is why I think you do have to it's hard in a pandemic, obviously, to plan ahead because no one knows at all, of course, what's going to happen. But that's why I do think it's important, and this is related to rejection in the sense that one of the best ways to deal with rejection is to be thinking always about other options, or to be thinking what a backup plan might be. And one way you do that is by networking. Networking is important, and I think it's one of those things where, understandably, I know a lot of students, it can be uncomfortable a little bit because you're not sure how to do it, and how to do it in sort of a comfortable, fluid manner. But I think one of the keys is, and I'm amazed that more people don't do this, is if you have an internship somewhere, make sure you're staying in touch with the places that you've interned. I think that's really important, and not enough people do that. And I say that because I've worked with people who have been interns. I've been an intern myself, but also afterwards in full-time roles. I've even managed interns a couple of times, and I've noticed they don't always stay in touch. And so I think it's important to keep in touch with people, and luckily tools like LinkedIn do make that easier.
Yeah, like Myles is saying, or Sarah, you can go if you want.
Yeah, I just have a few lessons about rejection that I've learned over the years. This does actually apply to my career. I work in HR, so I do a lot of hiring, I do a lot of firing, and it's a lot of being on the other side of rejection, which is weirdly just as hard. You don't think about that, but I think the biggest takeaway is rejection is a lot of the time not about you. It has nothing to do with you. So keep that in perspective. A lot of the time, like if we're rejecting a candidate for a role, it's because we've already filled it internally or something. Like, quite honestly, it is. So like, just like big picture, remember that a lot of the time it's nothing you did wrong. It's nothing that you could have controlled. It's factors completely outside of you that have nothing to do with you. And it's not like a personal reflection on you. So just remember that and keep things in perspective. The other thing I have learned is that rejection on the receiving end a lot of times can push you towards the right thing for you in the end. So maybe you got rejected from a job that you thought was your dream job, and then down the road that sets you up to get a different job that you would not have considered in the first place if you had gotten that first job. And then that actually ends up being like an amazing opportunity for you. So I think like it's kind of like the very cliche, like if one door closes, like another opens, but I think it's kind of true. Like if you get rejected from one thing, just because you had your heart set on that, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. There's always going to be more opportunities. And then last but not least, this is just a nice thing to tell yourself if you do get rejected. Why would you want to work for somewhere that like doesn't want you? And that it applies to dating life, it applies to work life, it applies to everything. But like, why would you want someone or something that doesn't, equally want you in return? There's a job out there, there's someone out there who's going to be very excited to have you. So go find them. Don't dwell on the people who don't want you. So those would be like kind of my big takeaways.
Yeah, definitely all good advice. To go back to what Myles was saying about networking too, I think it's like the way to pivot from a rejection is like through your connections. And so when I think about networking, I don't think of it as a like, what can other people do for me, but a what can I do for them? And the more that you're doing for other people and the more that you're helping other people and connecting other people, the top of the mind you will be for them when an opportunity does arise. So like as an example of that, I worked for the 930 Club for 3 years when I was in college, and there were no openings. It's a small skeleton crew of staff in the offices, and if someone leaves, they already have someone specifically usually lined up for that from their intern pool. So I knew that, and I interned, and I was, trying to position myself in a way that when something opened up, I would be there. And that essentially just meant like talking to all of the people that were around all of the time, learning about what they do, and just being as helpful as I could possibly be in any and all circumstances. So eventually, my job didn't exist before, and when I graduated, it was created. And those opportunities and the opportunity to create a role for yourself because you've made yourself in a way indispensable to them is, I think, really important too. That it's not just like applying for a job and then being like, oh, well, I didn't get it. But it's sort of like seeing where you want to be and then talking to the people that are there in that environment and figuring out a way to help them in that environment to excel. And then they'll want you for that reason.
And another idea about networking is even consider things like volunteering for a political party. If you volunteer for a political party, you get to meet some people and you get to meet sometimes some very powerful people. And if they get to know you a little bit and know what you're looking for, if they can't help you directly, they may be able to tell you someone that they know who can help you. And it may require a little bit of your time, but it's still making connections to people.
Yeah, don't be afraid to volunteer, and also don't be afraid to take a job that you may consider like beneath what you are trying to do or anything like that. I mean, I did door staff for the 930 Club for 2.5 years, which does include cleaning up vomit. So you just got to do what you got to do to get in people's minds and to make yourself in that environment.
It's a dirty job, but look at you now, Jordan. This is you climb the ladder,
Got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, so I think we've got. Does anyone else have anything else to add, or if not,
I just add one other thing. I mean, because this is all great advice, so not much to add. But it is also a matter of sometimes controlling your thinking, because we are going to sometimes have negative thoughts that come out of a rejection for whatever reason. And I think there's been a lot of points that have been made, especially by Sarah, that are very, very valuable in terms of recognizing, may not be about you and so forth. So I would just say to anyone, especially for folks that are coming out of college during this time, that if they get rejected and they feel a negative thought, the question to ask is that thought helping you or hurting you? many times, it might be helpful to say, oh, gee, maybe I need to learn some new skills, or I need to do some different things. Or maybe it's not about me, so it's not helpful for you to think that way. But to really take a step back whenever having something, come across your mind that might be negative, to really say, is it helping you or is it hurting you? And obviously, if it's hurting you, then figure out ways to let it go. I think is important as you go forward, especially in this complex environment we have right now.
Awesome. Thanks. Jillian, do you want to go ahead and...
Yeah, I think, again, you guys started touching on one of the next questions we were going to ask, which is great. Going into that networking, I think a lot of students or people our age sometimes are nervous to talk to people or ask for advice or just build those relationships. So diving more deep into the networking aspect, how do each of you go about approaching those relationships that you want to build in either like your past internships or jobs or just people in your industries that you maybe want to like collaborate or work with? So what is your approach to that?
I think it's seeing them as people rather than like a utility or a tool that you can use to get where you want to be. You're just adding friends, basically. You're trying to talk to them as other humans and relate to them and connect with them. And as I was saying before, help them. And I think that by doing those things, then they'll be closer to you and they'll want to have you around in those positions. Like people can tell if you're just out for something, if you're just using them, and that's not going to get you very far.
I agree. I agree completely with that. I'm thinking that, I believe I kind of like to think of myself as I want to be someone who's a connector, someone who's, just, it's really, networking is really just relationship building. And it's just and as someone who's in communications, I feel like that's just naturally something I want to do just personally and professionally. And so, for me, it's one of those things of just staying in touch with, and I know this is getting at a point I was making before, but I really think just staying in touch with people. It's, I like to sort of, if I haven't spoken with someone in a year, I like to reach out. And it can be it doesn't have to be me, in fact, I would prefer it not be me asking them for something. It's more just saying hi, how are you doing? Happy New Year. Often, sometimes I'll send these types of notes early in a new year. Or, and this is where LinkedIn is really great. LinkedIn will tell you if someone got promoted, or oftentimes if someone was quoted in an article or that type of thing. And so it's a great opportunity for you to just see that and then, just send them a quick message saying, hi, great to see that you were quoted in XYZ. Or saw you got promoted, congratulations, well deserved. And so it's just it's an opportunity to just to stay in touch and be involved. Basically, put yourself. I think it is important to put yourself out there and be involved.
I'm kind of an obsessive when it comes to communication, but the short version of the way I operate is it relates to what Jordan was saying. Try to think of the other person's point of view first. Try to hear yourself being received by someone who may or may not be interested or open to it, and you'll probably get further. And try to see how they behave and where they behave. Like, I'm someone who's on LinkedIn from time to time, but I'm not very prolific there. And if I'm on a Zoom with 300 people and someone's like, hey, I saw you were on the same Zoom, might not be something that gets my attention. And I mean, it's valid. Like, listen, if you want to reach someone and it's important to you, you will find a way. And it might not be ideal from the other person's communication standpoint. If it's important enough to you, that's okay. Like, and trust me, I mean, I just think about my use of payphones as a recent college graduate as literally the only mechanism available to me. If you were lucky, there were payphones that could actually receive calls as well. But you know, again, like to my earlier point, there's a billion ways. It doesn't mean it's any easier, and it's okay to feel awkward about it. And again, a conversation I was having with my recently graduated son just prior to this gathering. I also think networks are the most important thing. And if you have a way into speaking to someone, and this is the ultimate example, I can't imagine there's anyone who's on right now that wouldn't be happy to hear from another ex-WRGW person or current WRGW person for that matter. And for those of us who are alumni, we're desperately trying to identify anyone who's ever been on the station, especially if they moved into a related field, because we know we're out there. And what we also know is that the alumni office has only recently started maybe thinking about paying attention to this, let alone coding graduates. So it's really, really valuable. And I'm a big promoter of the Google form that Owen has created and circulated. And but yeah, you know, by the same token, it's a great starting point. And I think whether it's this or anything else you're involved with, it's a way to talk to people. And the political campaign thing that Myles mentioned is really like, it was insane the things that I was allowed to do because I was interested in music. And honestly, like, yes, the candidate was appealing to me on a certain level, but being able to call up agents and talk to them about benefit concerts that were definitely not going to happen for the most part was an amazing way to begin a network.
And don't be afraid of trying something, even if the success rate is small. I try to get whatever interviews I can get. So I sent a request to the mayor of Atlanta, Keish Lance Bottoms, because I realized that her father was in the early days of rock and roll, and he went to high school with another early person, Curtis Mayfield and Jerry Butler. So I used that, and I did send it on my legal email so that she saw that I was a judge, if that could help, even though I've been told by the Office of Judicial Responsibility I'm not supposed to do those kind of things. But I sent it with the idea that, you know, I just want to talk to her for a few minutes about any stories that her father shared with her concerning those early days of rock and roll and what she remembers about things in the household. Now, I haven't heard from her, but I thought it was worth a shot. And that's really the idea that, you know, take a chance. You may not succeed. You may try 100 times and not succeed, but you might get lucky one time.
I would also add on that, on that same topic, the worst thing people can say is no. So, I mean, why not reach out and just give it a shot? Also, generally, just in my own experience, I've found that normally people are much nicer than you expect them to be. People inherently want to feel like they are interesting and can provide value. So a lot of times if you reach out to people, they're pretty happy to talk to you, at least from what I've found just in my networking. I mean, I don't have a ton of experience, but like, honestly, I've never really had like a horrible networking experience. Most people are open to talking to you, or if they're not, they're at least polite about it and are like, honestly, I'm just too busy or whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, the worst thing they can say is no. So just remember that and be brave.
This is a bit of WRGW spin, but I mean, you have a platform to interview people. So people like to talk about themselves. You can use that as a way of getting to them rather than phrasing it as an informational interview just for yourself. Make it more about them and invite them on your radio show.
Wonderful.
Yeah, one quick comment to add, because this is just great set of comments. If you're an introvert, or maybe you're just uncomfortable talking to people that you don't know really well, it is important to maybe just try to find some role models, maybe people you know who are good at that, and maybe spend some time with them about, you know, how do you approach people, even if they're approaching it digitally, you know, writing the note and things like that, that just, you know, you might not be comfortable with it, perhaps because of, you know, what you like. And I don't know what the students are like today, but I remember when I was at WRGW back in the late 80s, early 90s, there were many students who were very introverted that played their show and pretty much left and so forth. Maybe it's different today, but I think it's just important that what was just said here is that you have a community here that can help support you. So if that is the barrier, and you have to look to say, what's stopping me from being able to effectively network? If that's one of the barriers, then I would suggest reaching out to people here to help you.
Certainly. All right. Well, I think that about wraps up all the questions we had. I guess we're super open to if you guys have any closing comments, just in terms of advice for students, if folks are looking for jobs right now. I feel like you have touched on a lot of that, but any of our panelists or alumni in the group have closing thoughts, we'd definitely love to hear them.
There seems to be a growing trend of people having like online portfolios, like their own website that's kind of their way of branding themselves. That might be a unique, well, no longer unique, but a new way of putting yourself out there online that's kind of a little more personalized than a LinkedIn page that everybody has, and can be a good way of showcasing, your radio shows. You can put your broadcasts on there and people can listen to them. If you do any other form of medium, whether that's visual or music, or anything else, you can all put that up there, and that can be a good way of actually showcasing yourself to people beyond just sending out like a paper resume.
Yeah, if someone's thinking about hiring you, they're going to look around. So what you have out there is extremely important. And, not everybody thinks about it all the time, including, I'm dealing with artists that hit me up and do not have a bio on their Spotify page. So if you sort of translate that into any kind of career ambition, yeah, I mean, what Jordan said was really valuable. The other thing I haven't had a chance to say, but it's been on my mind, is don't be afraid to start something yourself. And, I know that the startup accelerator that I participated in was like the third round, I think, of a process that happens on campus. But I will tell you that these teams, most of which were not students, were pitching to real investors in real situations, talking about real numbers and real opportunities. And if you think you have a good idea, especially right now, you have the time to develop it and try it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think that all of us have things within ourselves that we need to draw on. And you don't have the same routine excuse of not having time to deal with things. And I've personally been really focusing on things that I allegedly never had time for that I probably always did. As students, you have, I mean, again, I feel for any one of you that are undergraduates now, that anyone who didn't get to graduate, et cetera, or have the last term of their senior year. But there are opportunities that will be unique to you because of the time and space that you have to potentially develop them. And I really would, and again, alongside, I was on a Zoom today with Scott Galloway, and for those of you, I wasn't actually that familiar with him, but he's a well-known serial entrepreneur. He's a professor at NYU. He's a very outspoken guy. He said a lot of things that I probably won't pass on. But he just pointed out, in my mind, that all these people that we look up to may not be people to look up to, and you may have within yourself all that you need to get to the next place. And it's another way to address the rejection thing. Like if it's not there for you right now, it as Sarah pointed out, it may not have anything to do with you. If you believe you have a good idea, don't lose that instinct and find a way to follow up on it.
Just do it. Yeah, I mean, I had an independent venue in college. We ran a venue out of my friend's apartment, and that started because GW told us we couldn't have the show. So spin a rejection any way you got to do it.
Wonderful. Well, if that's everyone.
Can I end with a little bit of levity?
Oh yes, please.
Okay, so in the days that I was at WRGW, we didn't have computers to edit. We actually had to use razors, and you had to put the needle on the record, and you had to go back enough to make sure that it came on just when you wanted it to come on. But an advantage we did have, and Jonathan may have had part of that advantage as well, is being in Lisner, we were where the concerts took place. And at WRGW, you could go backstage to the concerts, and you could also go up to the rafters of the concert. So Kiss was playing Lisner Auditorium. And I first started backstage, and I found the prettiest girl I could find, and I said to her, "Do you want to go up to the rafters and watch the concert?" And she said, "Yeah, let's go there." So we went up to the rafters, and she said, "You see the drummer, Peter Criss?" I said, "Yeah, I see him. Isn't he great?" She says, "Yes, I'm going to sleep with him tonight." And I said, "Let's go downstairs now." Taking rejection.
There you go.
But it's not about you.
Gary, I wanted to pull this out and show this to you. So this is Neil Young at the cellar door.
Ah, great. I don't know.
Great album.
You might have been at that show.
This is me at WRGW when I had lots of hair.
What year?
You should still have. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I was going to ask what year that photo was taken, if you remember.
75. Spring of
Right.
75.
Cool. And I was just going to say, I remember Lisner Auditorium, but it was the Ramones that came to Lisner Auditorium. But I don't have a similar story like yours, Gary. But I will mention that when I was at GW, we were grandfathered. The drinking age was grandfathered for our year because they just switched it to 21, but they grandfathered it for freshman year, and they still had beer on the 5th floor at the Rathskeller, and the bowling alleys were still running at that time too. So there's bowling alleys on the 5th floor.
I have now that the panel's over. I have a question because I've heard a lot about this bar on the 5th floor of the Marvin Center in talking to alumni, and
Yeah, we got
I think I speak for the students on this panel in that we need you guys to petition, get a little petition to bring that back, because that sounds like a wonderful addition to that very gray building.
There was a bowling alley, and they got rid of that like right before Myles and Sarah and I got there.
I think it was there one year I was there.
It was there. I want to say the first year, maybe I was there. It was still there.
So I missed it. Like,
Yeah, I think it was still there because I remember the 5th floor of Marvin Center having like the bowling alley, and there was like, I guess I don't know if it was a bar. I don't know if they served alcohol actually, but like there was a place to eat. It was like a little it was kind of like if you went to a regular bowling alley and there's like a place to get food there too. So you could like get food and just like hang out kind of by the bowling alley. And like, I remember eating there a few times. Yeah.
Was it called Wingos or something like that? Or
Rathskeller. Called Rathskeller in my day.
No, it was called,
it was
Miles, you're right. I think it was called like Wingos.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it was there for like 3 months, and then they got rid of it like at the end of my first semester at GW.
Did you ever eat there, Miles? It was good.
No, it
was really good. It was like really greasy wings and stuff, but it was like so good. It was like bar food. Yeah, that's how I would describe
the
it.
advantage of the bowling alley was you could actually take a 1-credit course in bowling, which I did to get a credit.
Yes.
For free for a credit.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Amazing.
That's great.
Think we had that.
Also, the bowling alley was like one of the only ones in DC, because the other one, I think I heard something about there were 2 bowling alleys in DC at one point. One was at GW and the other was at the White House, and it's hard to get into that one.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, but then they took out the White House one because Obama, I think, wanted like a basketball court.
Yeah.
I think was the story.
Yeah,
So then we
like
were the only one for like a year or something.
Amazing.
And there was a pool hall up there too. So yeah. So you could shoot pool, you can do bowling, you could have beer, you could get food, and at the time we were allowed to charge the food on our dining cards. So if you put money on.
Man.
That was
We
that was what I was about to
Yeah.
mention. I also have to. I have the answer photo to. I don't know if you can see this very well, but whoops. There it is.
Oh, there you go.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh.
When the station reopens, it's in the binder. But yeah, kind of amazing to.
This is the
look at that.
famed binder of just old Hatchet articles with the very very timeless photos of Mark in the station with some cronies
Mark
and
and
whatnot.
Gary.
So, yeah, very.
It's good that the Hatchet wrote about you guys. I don't think we could get them to write about us.
At least not after
At that point-
2005's Are You Listening?
Yeah.
That's the last time they
Yeah.
covered us was Is Anyone Listening?
Ouch.
Yeah.
Well, we've got some listeners, so I think things have turned out well for us.
Yeah.
I do want to take 1 minute, and because I know we do have some students on the call, and definitely there's no pressure at all. But if anyone had been writing down questions throughout this, I definitely want to give folks a minute or two to ask some questions, or get some info from the alum. If anyone.
I've got a question.
Oh yes, please.
I want to know why you guys joined radio in the first place. Was it accidental? Was it something you had your heart set on? How did you find WRGW? And then, why did you stay?
I wish I could remember the moment, because somehow I think I spent my first 2 years there relatively oblivious. But I started doing a show my junior year, and I was senior director my senior year. And again, it's funny because the epiphany was fall term senior year, but the truth is everything going back to answering the phones at WBCN was a career path. And that's also something else, to think about in your own lives for the students. Think about everything that you've done and things that you've done for fun. That point that someone made earlier about how, wow, you could actually do something that you like as a career. Well, things are a lot more transparent, and people think much more broadly these days. There's so much more information. Culture is so much wider. Things were a lot more segmented in our time. It was changing, but not like it is now. But I think that to me, there was an element. We talked about this, I think, yesterday on the alumni committee call. But there was an element of finding a way to fit in when nothing else actually made sense, or no one else made sense. And certainly, the group of people that I was associated with, many of whom I'm still in touch with one way or the other. We had that, and a bunch of them actually started an alternative to the Hatchet while I was there, called The Current. God knows if any of that archival material exists, but it was that thing of kind of belonging to no one but belonging to each other. And again, I wish I could remember the catalyst, but I'm just glad it happened.
And
I grew up in New York when freeform radio was just starting. WBCN we knew was freeform in Boston, WMMR in Philly, and WNEW in New York. And while it was a very short period of time in radio, I was just captured by the idea of putting songs together and the segues of those songs. And so I started to do it, play the songs next to my bed, put it on a tape, start talking to the cassette tape machine. And by the time I got to GW, my intention was from the very first day was to get to the radio station and get on air. And my first show was actually 12 midnight to 2 a.m., which I was willing to do to work my way up the ladder.
Yep.
For me, so I knew I wanted to do something related to campus news reporting, that kind of thing. And I'd been in the high school involved in the high school newspaper, and got to GW and was trying to figure out where I would do that, whether it would be. And so I looked at the Hatchet, and I looked at WRGW, and I think I might have looked at GWTV. But just at WRGW, I was excited about how you talk about that. We talked earlier. It might have been you, Mark, who mentioned it. That entrepreneurial spirit of WRGW, and just I was excited about how when I joined WRGW, the news department was on the verge of extinction. Literally, there were of the returning people of the department, there were maybe 3 from the prior year. There had been a lot of graduations and departures. And I kind of found out this after, like later on, like more the backstory, but I was excited. But the idea of sort of, we're building something, we're growing something here, and just being able to communicate with people that radio isn't a one-to-one medium was just so exciting. And the people too, as I said, WRGW did become, and I think pretty much almost all alums feel this way, the station, your family in college. And it's been great staying in touch with so many people, still from the station. And it's just, so many of my memories outside of the classroom are connected to WRGW.
Yep, absolutely, Myles. I remember just all of my favorite memories, I think, from college are honestly just hanging out in the radio station or hanging out at WRGW events. But I kind of stumbled into radio. I didn't find it till second semester sophomore year, I think. I had some friends who had a radio show, and they weren't super involved with the station. They just did one music show randomly. But they were like, "Oh, you should come intern on our show." So I was like, "Okay, yeah, sounds fun." So I did that, and ended up just falling in love with it, and getting really involved my last 2 years of college. So yeah.
To make a long story short, my grandfather was the radio announcer for the New York Times on the radio for 40 some odd years, WQXR. So I knew from the get-go that I desperately wanted to join WRGW, to the extent that I was actively looking for it during Colonials Week, and they weren't there. There was no one from the radio station tabling. To the station itself, I had a janitor tell me where it was. And the only people that were there were the professionals that were being paid to rewire the station. So no students or anything. But so I knew from the beginning that it's where I wanted to be, and spent probably more time in that basement than anywhere else all through college. There were probably some days where I didn't really see the sun. But absolutely love and cherish every second of it. And I think it does go directly to what Gary was saying, that it's a community for people that struggle to find a community anywhere else at GW. And I think that was what made it so special for all of the participants in it. And that was really what we wanted to kind of cultivate among the 300 participants.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we are approaching the end of our time. So I think we might start to wrap up. However, I do want to thank everyone so much for taking the time out of our busy schedules on a Friday evening of all times. This is really the true loyalty to WRGW's. It's just overflowing me with joy. So thank you guys so much. I do want to give a quick note to people who are maybe watching this after the fact or weren't able to join us today. If you have any questions, or if you want to possibly even try and connect with some of these wonderful alumni who joined us today, which I'm sure they would be happy to talk to you, please email me and let me know. You can reach me at alumni@gwradio.com. And yeah, seriously, we want people to be talking to each other at the station. We want our alumni to connect. If alumni see this, also email me. Please email me. We want to talk to you especially. And we also definitely want to have you fill out our questionnaire and get on our email list and just stay in touch. So definitely do that. To everyone listening and watching, thank you for joining today. It was really great, real fun. Thanks.